Let's begin our business of shaping policy for today by looking at the significance of the media on a day like this where advocacy is being drawn on the independence of the media. It's World Press Freedom Day, a special day dedicated to look at the independence of the media and to also look at the sacrifices being made by journalists over the years. We have the privilege of hosting one of our own who has been in journalism for 50 years. We have the privilege of hosting Bayo Olaoye, who is our in-house guest this morning. Glad to have you join us this morning.
Thank you very much, Femi.
Good
I'm glad to
morning.
be here. Blessing.
Happy
Glad to
Press
be here.
Freedom Day.
Yes, this is the day the Lord has made. It's a happy day of mixed reaction, both sadness and happiness. Happiness that, the media has grown in Nigeria, the media has grown globally. I thank God for my own life. 2 weeks ago, I celebrated 50 years in the media, and I'm glad I've been part of it. I've seen 5 coups, 5 military coups when I was in Radio Nigeria. I have been harassed, I have been intimidated, I have been threatened. So, out of the 50 years, I have a lot of stories to tell.
All right. You will tell the story, which is why we brought you. It's also important to know that on a day like this, it's meant to also celebrate journalists, the sacrifices over the year, to celebrate people behind the scene, even those who are presenting, people like Blessing and the rest of us, and people like you. Now, you started journalism 50 years ago. I wasn't born then. I was on the other side. Interesting. And I'm sure Blessing was on the other side too. Maybe we were presenting on the other side anyway. But the issue is, tell us your story. Let's start with that. On a day like this, it's important we talk about the role of people who are behind the story. What inspired you to take up journalism or go into media practice?
I started this job in 1974 at Radio Nigeria, now Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria. I started in the newsroom as a news assistant trainee, and I worked in the newsroom. Later on, downstairs, I was in the reporter's corps. I was a pioneer of the original reporter's corps. That means professional reporters covering different beats. I was a labor correspondent. I was part of those that formed the Sports Writers Association, SWAN. I covered the National Assembly. I covered the airport. Almost everywhere. I covered several. Until later, I became a senior editor covering international assignments and traveling with people like Shehu Shagari. I traveled with Shehu Shagari for so many African countries, especially East Africa. I know a lot about East Africa, so it was exciting. And at a time, I got into trouble with the police when this issue of 2 uniforms for the Nigerian police, the gray one and the black one. And I wrote a story speculating about the acceptance of the gray ones. And I think it was Gambo. It was under Gambo. I was locked up in Obalende here. My bosses have to come around. I told Atilade Atoyebi, Andy Anarado, my boss, I'll remember his name later on, came around and talked to Gambo. And Chief Rotimi Williams, who was very fond of me too, came around and I was released. So I've had my own share of intimidation. I've also had my own share of covering assignments and being bullied by policemen or being battened by business policemen. So I have my own share of intimidation and harassment and even death. Because when I was covering the Oniru something, chieftaincy something, I was threatened several times in the campus here. But being a boy on the ground, I was able to survive it. I was really threatened when there was this controversy about a new Oba for Morocco and that kind of thing. So it's a day the Lord has made, and there are so many stories to tell, like I said.
All right.
So coming to Souk,
Okay.
yeah, it's an exciting place to work. It's an exciting environment. I think I have a wealth of experience to deposit here for this great organization.
All right, let's look at some of the stories that you've talked about. Earlier, you mentioned that you've been harassed while doing your job, and this day is a day where press freedom is celebrated. Looking back 50 years and along the line of your career to now, is there a difference in terms of the freedom given to the press to do their job?
I think the freedom now is there's a bit of freedom for the media in Nigeria. It's just that some of my colleagues are mentally lazy. Investigative reporting has lost its panache. There's nothing like people are not doing investigative reporting anymore.
Why do you think they're not doing investigative reporting?
But first of all, the finances are not there. Then number two, bureaucracy. Civil servants won't release information. And then you have the environment itself. People look at journalists as busybodies, and they may not divulge information to you. And then you have the government itself. The government does not trust the media, and it's unfortunate.
All right. The theme for this year's celebration is journalism in the face of environmental crisis, which could also be issues related to climate change, threat, and violence. You've had your own share of the story. But if you compare 50 years ago, and I want to believe that was during the military era, now that we have civilian rule, has there been any difference when it comes to journalists operating in a safe environment?
Mm. When we talk about journalists operating in a safe environment, at least now is that there's much more risk now for journalists covering the environment. When you talk about terrorism, journalists are not given enough protection to cover international crisis. Look at the Ukraine and the Ukraine crisis,
The Gaza.
and the Gaza,
Yeah.
and the journalists don't have access to information. Even look at our own here, the Delta, the crisis in the Delta. The military are not allowing journalists to go there and seek information. So the restriction is still there. The attitude of government is still there, and political hurdles, political will is not there. So journalists face the same constraints like that were there 50 years ago in a different form.
So nothing has changed
Nothing has changed. Really,
significantly,
nothing
with
has changed.
the evolution.
Maybe now you have technology, you can refer to the laptop, you can refer to internet, but the atmosphere is still there. The landscape is still there. The government still doesn't want to divulge information to the media. The military authorities, the authorities themselves, don't want to divulge information, and they use all sorts of gimmicks. They intimidate.
All right, let's look at the press, the freedom of the press when it comes to platform. You know, the stand of owners versus the ethics of the job, and even the freedom of the journalist to do their job. Could you speak to that?
Yes, this issue of social media, and the social media has eroded some of the respect and integrity of the media, because almost everybody now wants to be a journalist, for goodness sake. Everybody that can type, put two words together, think they have authority over the use of words and over the use of information. There's something in journalism called source. You must have your source for every information. And that is different from misinformation or speculation. So now you have the social media aglow with all sorts of information that are misleading, that are immoral, and that should be censored. And that is why the Nigerian Broadcasting Commission should check the activities of the social media. The social media is not portraying the media as responsible, as an responsible institution. And that is very bad.
Okay, you just talked about the impact of social media on journalism, but let's talk about independence of the media.
Yes. He who pays the piper dictates the tune. It's all over the world. And it hasn't changed, even abroad, all over the world. The owners of the media will want to dictate, in a way, the trend that you will go, politically or economic or otherwise. But now in Nigeria, I see a trend in Nigeria in broadcasting, radio broadcasting. Whenever in radio broadcasting, I have more private investment. So there's much more independence. There's much more freedom. There's much more space for the media to operate. When I was in Radio Nigeria, there's something called NTBB, not to be broadcast, including music. At the time, Fela Anikulaku music was not allowed. At the time, Mono Mono by Johnny Hastrop was not allowed to be played on air. At the time, to Femi Kuti, Sorry for Africa was banned, but it was played by Rhythm FM and other stations in those days, even in those days. So now there's independence in private broadcast stations. I can say that.
All right. As a follow up to that, because in mass comm, there's what we call media ownership. Now, how does that come into play when it comes to upholding the ethics of the job and being professional? How do you draw the line between the interest of the owners and then the dictates and the demand of the job, which is where professionalism comes in?
Unfortunately, the owners still control everything. I don't want to mention newspapers in Nigeria. I don't want to talk about their ownership because you see that most of these are politically minded. Right now, a story carried by the nation may not be carried by Punch. And if it is carried by Punch, it's carried from a different angle. The Vanguard may not touch it because of this ownership issue. What does the board say? What do they want? And sometimes the borders on security, sometimes they don't want to touch some stories. But really, the owners still dictate the tune, unfortunately.
But in that aspect, given the example that you provided, couldn't it be as a result of niche? So this paper may not want to touch a particular story because it's not within their scope.
I think the history of the newspaper itself speaks for itself. For instance, the Tribune, established by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, talks about socialism, democratic governance, talks about politics. Unlike a paper like Vanguard, that is more inclined to issues in the Niger Delta and women affairs, and that, or like Punch, which is very apolitical. Punch is always talking about politics. Or like the guy which is conservative. So
you might not mention names, but just make
yes,
references.
I'm talking like a professional, and I think I have to do these things.
Maybe you're just trying to spell out niche.
Those are just as
different
references. It's like you're talking to mass communication students. You have to talk to them in the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation that the professionals are there. The owners still want to control. At the time, the guy there was a problem with the NUJ as regards payment or whatever. Right now, the remuneration of journalists is nothing to write home about, and that affects productivity.
Now you've mentioned the NUJ, which is the Nigeria Union of Journalists. What should be their role in ensuring professionalism and, of course, freedom of the press?
They have done that a lot, in Lagos especially. The NUJ has done a lot in the issue of the integrity of the journalist. Who is a journalist? Every practicing journalist must have a form of identification. You must register with your NUJ. You must have a membership card. In the days when we had so many quacks around, the NUJ intervened, and we're almost in every press conferences to ascertain the identity of journalists covering the assignment. The NUJ sometimes intervenes when the publisher or the owner of a media organization goes beyond their bounds and infringe on the rights of journalists. The NUJ sometimes intervenes when the salaries don't come early. The owners of media now have a tendency to delay journalist salaries for 6-5 months. Don't let me mention names. It's traditional. They assume that journalists are wealthy people and they keep their salaries for 5 or 6 months. That's not good enough. So the NUJ has done a lot. Right now, it's doing a lot. You're looking at welfare of elderly ones in the profession. Those who have done the considerable time. Yes, so the NDA has intervened, and it has done a lot to uphold the rights of journalists, and so the quality of the professionals themselves. Don't forget that you have the NIJ, which also trains journalists. I was a pioneer student of NIJ too, and they're doing a lot now. Now that we have a veteran, Chief Shegun Oshoba, as the chairman of the board, he now is really updated to university. So that affects the profession itself, because journalists have to be trained. You just don't come out of the school of mass comm, just like I always say in the newsroom. I think that you're a journalist. No, you still have to go through the rigors of knowing the psychology of the media and the areas that you operate.
All right, let's look at some of the hazards or the environmental crisis, that may be like a shortfall for media practice in Nigeria. You've shared your own story, the experience you've had. But what are some of these environmental crises? We've talked about climate change, form of violence, and what do you think that be done on the part of the federal government, on the part of the government to create a safe environment for journalists to do what they love?
I think I'll go into this issue of this debate about should we have a state police or should the federal or the Nigerian police force be expanded. I think there's a need to carry it forward and have state police. It will ensure total inclusion, and it will cover the space within that state. Yes, governors will exploit it for their political gains, but we need the state police to widen security and to give protection to all, including journalists. We also need government also need to be open to the media. Government should be open to the media and not intimidate journalists unnecessarily. The society also should be able to trust what journalists churn out. We've gone all the way to put out information. They should not doubt it. And then the government must regulate the social media. The social media is a menace on practicing journalists in Nigeria. It's gone so bad that people are now wondering who's a journalist really. That's defamatory.
Well, peculiar to every technological innovation, you always have two sides, the good side and the bad side. Maybe you're talking about the bad side.
Yes.
The good side to it also, we should also talk about
Yes, the good side. The good side is that we have fantastic guys like you and Blessing coming up. There are bright young men and women in the media who are doing excellently well. On radio too, I've seen some very good practitioners. So we cannot throw away the baby with the bathwater.
You mentioned earlier that you were locked up at the cell in Obalende prison, and that was not a pleasant experience, I'm sure. Now, this day talks about journalism for the planet, and it's talking about the environment as well. And while you were talking before we went on the break, you mentioned that sometimes people do not even believe what journalists say. Now, what are those situations that will make what journalists come out with, stories that they put out, be doubted? What is the role of the society in ensuring that journalists are able to do their jobs, particularly when it comes to reporting environmental crisis, reporting issues of climate change, and even conflicts in parts of the world?
Yes, that's a very good question. You find out that even in ordinary situations like Nigeria, when even the military or the police, they want information, the people are reluctant to give information. And that affects the media too. There have been instances when the media will want to do investigation, and the local populace or the vigilant or the local, the indigents will be reluctant to release information. That curtails whatever report or curtails the impact of whatever that report will want to. So there's still the problem of, except by counseling or by advice from traditional leaders or traditional institutions to these people to cooperate with the media or the security people. Usually, they don't want to give out information. That is against professional reporting and professional coverages. And then you find out that in covering the climate itself, we don't have enough specialized journalists now talking about the environment. Now the environment bit is a bit sparse now, and more experts are coming into the field of reporting about the climate. Don't forget that the attitude of the media itself to climate change has been very, very, very negative, very pessimistic. Most of the media didn't believe in this climate change until they were seeing issues of flooding and that kind of thing. So we need the trust of the local people. We need their confidence for the media to operate. And the media needs to be supplied with information.
All right, the UN chief emphasized on the role of the media in helping to promote the advocacy for a better climate situation in tackling environmental crisis. Now, you've mentioned the shortfall, but let's talk about the solution now. What do you think the media space can be taking advantage of in promoting this message about climate change? Because the media is very sensitive. You look at the role of the media.
The media should now tell the whole world that the world has changed. It's not business as usual, and that they should be ready for certain inconveniences as the world progresses. In other words, it's not a standstill. People must move. For progress to be achieved, there must be movement. So the people must realize now that a stream that was there last year may not be there again, and people need to do certain things. They have to plant more trees. They have to control pollution, and they have to drink good water. These are part of climate change issues that the
Access to
media
clean water.
needs to be access to water, access to
Clean
water, clean potable water. Once the media has been able to achieve that, I think we'll have progress. And also that there's this usual conflicts in Africa, intertribal and that kind of thing. And that I think our political leaders should do more to intervene and suppress these conflicts. And usually these conflicts have to do with poverty and hunger, and the fact that people struggle for the little resources that are around.
Now, as a journalist, you're expected to know at least a bit of every subject, a bit of everything. But there are also specialized bits. You talk about reporting, environmental reporting, people in that field being very scarce. Not many of journalists are in that field. How can the media ensure collaboration with those who are in specialized area for accurate reporting?
Our training institutions need to do a lot. The mass communication departments of the various universities. I've worked a lot with mass comm students in universities, and I think there's a shortfall. They're just making this in a run-of-the-mill thing. They don't prepare the students or the graduates for the world outside. In other words, is the usual. The curriculum is so close and short-circuited that it doesn't give them it doesn't give room to the realities of the situation. In other words, environmental studies should be introduced in all media institutions, in all department of mass communication. Issue like in the environmental studies, so that the journalists can get involved and specialize. Now, except for only recently that you have really correspondents talking about property and housing, except a few newspapers that started it. So there's a need for more journalists to get specialized, and that has to be done by our institutions, our training institutions. They are not paying enough attention to the training of future journalists, and any journalist that just comes out of mass comm school now thinks that he's done and made, and that's not the case anyway.
All right. I would like you to, maybe this is where your experience will come in. Let's talk about the threat being faced by journalists in the course of duty. You've had, maybe in the military, where people were being arrested, were being jailed. And this theme, one way or the other, if you look at the extension to what is happening in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Russia, some journalists, in fact, of journalists have been killed since the war started. Now, in this kind of situation, what should be the ideal thing to protect the interest of journalists in the line of duty? Let's talk about insurance. Let's talk globally. What should be the standard? And also, what should be the role of media owners and even journalists who are being drafted to these war zones?
It's a sad story. Up till now, I've seen all the 5 coups in Nigeria, and I've heard about insurance being
How
paid.
do you survive?
Insurance.
You covered the coup, right? So share your
No,
experience, which is exactly what I'm talking about.
okay, the one of Muritala Mohammed. I was in the newsroom, and the newsroom was downstairs. And here were these guys just coming in with one of our newscasters. And we were wondering where they were going. And he just removed his whatever cap, threw it away. And before we knew it, was in the newsroom. Everybody go down. Everybody. So he thought that was the news. He thought that was the studio. So he came to the newsroom thinking that was the studio. And so I think it was Jimmy Awushika or somebody that just pointed at him. Take me to the studio straight. And they went to the studio. And here was Jacob Akinyemi Johnson. It was and I think I remember the other announcer, and that was it.
It took over the place.
That was over the place. And we had to stay there for, I think we were in the newsroom for 2 days. They were bringing food from the barracks, but my auntie, Mrs. Rose, just said, no, I'll be bringing food for you every day. I'll be bringing clothes for you. So we were in the place for 48 days. And
you meant
48 hours. And it's unbelievable. Yes. All the 5 coups. And the federal government promised they were going to, up till now, nothing has happened. And very soon I'll be writing my memoirs on my stay as a reporter in Radio Nigeria, because it was a military environment. You are coming into the studio at 5:30, and may God bless you if the soldier at the gate gets annoyed or is infuriated by what you are saying. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah,
But me as a Lagos boy, I had a way of relating to them, because usually I would take them out in the evening. So I had a way of relating to them. So usually I would walk down to the studios 5:30, and I would jolly well go inside. But others will not dare that, will not do that. And so I just survived out of sheer instinct and street sense, so to say. But it was not an ideal environment for the practice of journalism, because while you are preparing your report, the soldier will just come in and go around and say, how you doing? I mean, that is the newsroom with a gun in his hand. And he goes back. They will tell you that's the commandant in charge of Radio Nigeria. And so that atmosphere was terrifying.
Anyway, I must commend your courage for surviving 5 coups and here, which is why we're having this conversation. So a lesson from that. But now, in 2024 now, we're talking about journalists who might not have the same experience of coup like you're talking about. But there are other issues, issue of threats, violence, and intimidation. So my question earlier was to talk about the kind of insurance cover and what can be done to also protect the plight of journalists who are on the line or in the line of duty, or especially when they are covering war zones or crises.
I think the NUJ and the Guild of Editors, because I belong to the Guild of Editors and I belong to all the professional, where they were working on this issue of insurance, and I don't know, they got stuck somewhere and they couldn't continue. First of all, what we are talking about now, that the remuneration of a practicing journalist must reflect the economy of the country. In other words, there are certain benchmark that you must follow in paying a journalist. He must look well. I'm sorry to say, there were times when journalists would just walk in slippers and whatever, and just walk into press conferences in a shabby manner. But right now, journalists are well dressed. they have dignity, they have integrity, they are paid well, they must live well because they are using their brains. They must live well. They have families. They must have career pattern. There must be a career pattern for them. They are human beings, for Christ's sake. But the society hasn't realized that, and the sooner the better. So that is why these young ones, we tell them that you must specialize. You must specialize to distinguish yourself from other journalists. You cannot be a run-on-the-mill journalist. You must specialize. On an issue, the way it's going now in the media, you must specialize. I even hear now that we have data journalism now in America. Yeah, even in Nigeria.
All right, let's look at your experience and what are the skills a journalist would need to navigate areas where they cover, particularly areas of environmental crisis and conflicts. Now, you gave the example of how you were able to break through the military area, make friends with some of them, and so it wasn't so much of a trouble for you compared to other journalists. So you had a lot of social and emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So added to that, the social and emotional intelligence, what other skills do you think journalists would need to effectively do their job, regardless of the environment, or particularly when you are in a crisis environment?
Number one, a journalist must be very observant. Very observant. You can get inspiration, story angles, story concepts from anywhere. In other words, the journalist must be observant and must be able to listen. And listen to people, listen to the environment, and listen to others. A journalist also must be humble, because if you are not humble, you can't get across to people. And of course, there's the issue of patience, the issue of integrity. You must not sell with a pot of mesh. You must not be found with a pot of mesh. There must be integrity. There must be personality. A journalist must look well and sound well. And a journalist must be educated. You must read every day and listen to or read your competitors. If you work for the nation, you must read The Guardian and Vanguard and Punch. If you work for a radio station, you must listen to your competitors. If you work for a television station, you watch other television stations so that you can literally borrow ideas or learn from them. And finally, I think a journalist has to be patriotic. A journalist should not run down his country. I don't believe in this issue. I don't believe in Japa. And I don't believe in running down our leaders. I believe that we have worse cases in Africa, and our media should promote the Nigerian flag. They should promote the Nigerian culture. They should promote the Nigerianness in us, because there's no other country like Nigeria. And there's no other people that behave like Nigerians. So we are a peculiar people. But the media is getting it wrong, and politics is getting into this. When it comes to national unity, it's Nigeria. We can't.
Now let's look about access to information. There's always this slogan in the newsroom. Thank God you are the head of a newsroom, that a journalist is as good as your source.
Yeah.
You know. Now, but in this age compared to when you started, let's talk about access to information. Would you say that has improved? And what has been the impact of technology or social media? Then on the other hand, let's talk about freedom of access to information, whereby there's a bill in charge of that. Has that been very effective? Do you think journalists actually taking advantage of that bill to have access to information?
The access to information has been outstanding and awesome. Journalists now have all sorts of channels to get information. The danger is mental laziness. I always stress this, even in classrooms and workshops. Mental laziness. Because you have a laptop to get information and get access to information, doesn't make you so mentally lazy that you just cut and paste. It's to guide you to do whatever you want to do and write. So people don't write anymore. People don't create anymore. And people don't look for sources. Don't forget that my colleague, Irabo, went to jail because he did not disclose his source on a story he wrote about Nigerian ambassadors being posted. He got all the names right, But the military people said, no, where did you get the information? That was the issue of Decree 4, Decree number 4. So journalists have always protected their sources. So a journalist must have a source, a credible source that, hello, how far is this? Is it true? You cannot really rely on your laptop. And don't forget, that's from the Western nation. They have their own biases and that are detrimental. So you must look across the line and don't just think that the laptop is the be all and not at the end all. So yes, they have access to information, but that access is either misused or abused. It has not been properly galvanized to give us a better reportage.
So let's look at the role of the NBC, which is the regulatory body for the media in Nigeria. Now, in the regulations of the NBC, you mentioned one, the NTBB not being broadcasted. There are songs that you cannot play on air. There are things you cannot say, all of that. Do you think the media is gagged, or in the effort of the NBC to regulate the media, it is doing just the right job?
Yes. That's why the NBC got into trouble with the Federal High Court when it infringed on the rights of certain radio stations for saying certain things. And that really was criticized by the Guild of Editors, because we said that you are to supervise and not to control professional output. In other words, these guys were asking questions. They were asking their listeners their comments on a particular issue. It's not their official standpoint or their official position on that issue. And here was the NBC coming down on them and taking them to court, fining them. It had to go to court. The NGA came in, the Guild of Editors came in, and the court said, look, allow these people to practice their profession. Do other things. Do regulatory things. There are so many radio stations that their programming have to be checked. Their music have to be checked. But the NBC got it wrong at that time. The NBC should regulate. And not even train, just to regulate what is going on, regulate training, regulate professionalism, regulate transmission, and then promote the ethics of broadcasting. The ethics of broadcasting is to educate, inform, and entertain.
All right, let's get back to the second aspect of my question, which I wanted you to react to this issue of Freedom of Information Act, which is to give journalists access to public information, official information. But do you think journalists in recent times have been taking advantage of that act?
The fact is that they have not been taken advantage. The status quo still remains in that government still have not conformed with that act. Government has not released some information that we have asked them to. For instance, the NUJ is demanding that the president, the Senate president, and the entire hierarchy of the National Assembly should declare their assets and let us know. Up till now, that has not happened. That also has not happened in the state. If we ask Sanwo-Olu now that, Your Excellency, it has not happened. Neither has Obasa, the speaker. So it's still there. It's there on paper and nobody's. And then if you go to courts, they control the courts too. So it's counterproductive. Let government and the authorities just allow journalists to practice their profession, because they have professional bodies that will control conduct and misdemeanor and professionalism. And then that's it. I think government still gags the press. I think Nigerian government still gags the press. The DSS is always behind every media looking for misinformation or whatever, and that shouldn't happen. They should find other things to do and leave the media alone.
All right, let's look at ensuring that the standard is maintained and continued. For those who are in schools or who will someday get into school to study mass communication, where do you think the disconnect is between what is studied in school and what is actually the practice in the industry? How can that gap be bridged?
We don't have enough books on the media. Most of the people of our generation have written some books, but right now, mass communication students don't have enough literature or journals as an extension of their studies in school. And the training is still not there. When I was at the University of Lagos, we learned how to control the console. That the studio managers, yes, we learned all about the technical things too.
Because you had a studio.
You had a studio.
So how many schools have a studio? Because I know that
they should have.
The school should have like a campus radio.
They should have. They should have. Then if you have a mass comm department, you have a studio for broadcasting. You should have a studio for arts. You should have studio for the media. There must be studios for practical sessions with these students. You can't just bring them on the streets like that. There must be practicals right there in the campus. You bring celebrities to come there to the campus and talk to them and practicalize these things. That is not happening. Mass comm it's not an issue of going to the library and cram definitions. No, mass comm is a practical thing. It's like an engineer or a doctor. They have to tell them how to do these things. You just don't throw them. That is why you have people, even mass comm students now, sometimes are frustrated because they don't have a direction. It is when they have studios that they will excel in a part, they will specialize. There's a lot of things to be done by the faculties of mass comm. And we, people of my own generation, Jimmy Disu was somewhere yesterday, I think AIT or somewhere, talking on this issue of, the departments of mass communication do a lot to students practically on campus. You have sponsors who can build mini studios for them. There must be
different printing press.
Yes.
Now that there's technology, have their own
even advertising.
Have their own.
They are teaching advertising, and there's no
online dailies.
There's no room for them to know about graphics and practice graphics and come. We learned everything at Unilag, everything.
All right. You've been in the industry for 50 years. That's quite commendable. Kudos, and that's quite encouraging. But my question to you is, what has kept you for the past 50 years? Maybe the new crop of journalists could also draw inspiration from
It's a passion. It's a passion. And I give glory to my late father, Joseph Bayo Olaoye. Well, he was a former headmaster of Holy Cross School here. My mother, too, a mistress, what do you call it here? So my father encouraged me a lot. And when I was small, while he was reading Daily Times, I would be by his side and be taking other pages from him. So he exposed me to the reading culture at an early age. So when I got to Lula College, that was it. I also have people who have helped me a lot. My very good friend, Jimmy Aoshika, the managing director of Insight, Mr. Abiodun Shobanjo, Andy Anarado, may his soul rest in peace. These are wonderful people who have helped me all along. And my children and my wife. Yes.
Interesting. All right. What a way to wrap up this conversation. We must commend you for all you've done over the years. Don't worry, your memory is very soon. Tell the story. Yes. And I'll be very proud to be part of that production, because you've done well.
Today is a happy day.
Yes. For me, 50 years is no joke at all. If you find a 50-year-old man or woman, they can tell you what they've seen in life and tell you the battles, the forts, and the
so I've told my wife to cook a special efori this afternoon.
That's nice.
So this is a special day.
Of WordPress freedom.
When you just look back, it's unbelievable.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.